I walked into my late father's estate meeting expecting formality and sadness. Instead, I got betrayal. The lawyer's office smelled like old books and expensive furniture polish. My husband Drew sat across from me, his brother Trent beside him. Their mother Diane perched on the edge of her chair, perfectly composed. The lawyer, Mr. Harrison, shuffled papers with trembling hands. "There's been a change to the will," he said quietly, not meeting my eyes. My stomach dropped. Change? What change? Dad had been clear about everything. I was his only child, his caretaker through 6 months of hospice care. I'd held his hand through every treatment, every bad night, every moment of pain. What kind of change? I managed to ask. Mr. Harrison cleared his throat. "The estate has been left entirely to Trent Whitmore." The room tilted. I gripped the arms of my chair, my knuckles turning white. Trent sat perfectly still, his face carefully neutral. Drew wouldn't look at me. Diane smiled softly, like this was all perfectly reasonable. "Wait," I said, my voice shaking. "Who changed the will?" Mr. Harrison pulled out a document, sliding it across his desk with obvious reluctance. "I received these updated documents 3 weeks before your father's passing," he explained. They appeared to be properly signed and notarized. 3 weeks. That was impossible. 3 weeks before Dad died, he could barely hold a pen. I'd been filling out his medical forms myself, guiding his hand through signatures because his strength was almost gone. And Trent hadn't visited once during those final months. Not once. "This doesn't make sense," I said, my voice rising. "My father wouldn't have done this. He told me everything was settled." Trent finally spoke, his voice smooth and practiced. "People change their minds, Mallory." Maybe he realized family should go to family. The implication hung in the air. I wasn't really family. Not like Trent, who shared Drew's last name and Diane's approval. Never mind that I'd spent every day for 6 months watching my father fade away while they were nowhere to be found. "I need to see those documents," I said firmly. Mr. Harrison hesitated, glancing at Trent. That hesitation told me everything I needed to know. Something was very, very wrong. Drew finally spoke as we left the lawyer's office. His hand touched my elbow, gentle but firm. "Mallory, just let it go," he said quietly. "Don't make a scene." I stared at him. My father had just died 2 weeks ago. Someone had apparently stolen my inheritance. And he wanted me not to make a scene. Diane caught up with us in the parking lot, her heels clicking on the pavement. Her smile was sweet as poison. "It's what your father wanted, dear," she said, patting my arm. "I know it's hard to accept, but we have to respect his final wishes." I pulled away from both of them, tears burning behind my eyes. But they weren't tears of grief anymore. They were tears of rage. I drove home alone, my mind racing. Drew and Trent followed in Trent's car, probably congratulating themselves on how smoothly things had gone. They thought I would accept this. They thought I was too grief-stricken, too passive, too broken to fight back. They were wrong. Because I remembered something they didn't know I knew. Something Dad had told me just days before he died, when his mind was still sharp despite his body's weakness. He'd made his intentions very clear. And this wasn't it. At home, I went straight to my father's belongings. I'd packed them carefully after his death, unable to throw anything away. His reading glasses, his favorite coffee mug, his worn leather wallet. And his hospice journal. The nurses had encouraged him to write during his lucid moments. "It helps process things," they'd said. Dad had filled pages with shaky handwriting, documenting his thoughts, his fears, his gratitude for my care. I sat on the bedroom floor and opened the journal with trembling hands. Most entries were mundane. Observations about the weather, memories from his childhood, notes about his medications. Then I found the entry from 4 weeks before his death. "Talked with Mallory today about the will," he'd written in his distinctive slanted script. "Told her everything goes to her. She's earned it. She's been here every day, every night. I couldn't have asked for a better daughter. She deserves everything I can give her." I photographed the page with my phone, my hand steady now. He'd never mentioned changing anything. He'd never mentioned Trent at all, except to note once that Drew's brother never visits. There was no way he'd signed new documents. Which meant only one thing. They'd forged it. The next morning, I returned to Mr. Harrison's office. He looked uncomfortable when his secretary showed me in. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said carefully. "If you're here to contest, I need a copy of the signed will," I interrupted. "The new one. I have a right to see what my father supposedly signed." He couldn't refuse. It was public record now. He made copies slowly, as if hoping I'd change my mind and leave. I took them home and spread them across my kitchen table. Then I pulled out everything I had with Dad's signature. Old birthday cards he'd sent me over the years. Checks from before he got sick. A letter he'd written when I graduated college. I compared them all to the signature on the will. My heart pounded as I studied the differences. The slant was wrong. The pressure was uneven in places Dad always pressed firmly. The capital W in his last name was completely different from every other signature I had. This wasn't his handwriting. This was someone trying to copy it and failing. I took photographs of everything, laying them side by side for comparison. But proof wasn't enough. I needed more. I needed to understand how they'd done it and when. Most importantly, I needed them to incriminate themselves. I didn't confront them. Every instinct screamed to call Drew, to demand answers, to show him the evidence. But something held me back. If they knew I suspected fraud, they'd cover their tracks. They'd destroy evidence. They'd prepare defenses. So instead, I played dumb. I accepted condolence calls from family friends. I attended the memorial service Diane organized without consulting me. I smiled weakly when people asked how I was holding up. "It's been hard," I said honestly. "But I'm managing." Drew watched me carefully during this time, like he was waiting for an explosion that never came. Trent avoided me entirely, which was fine. I didn't want to be near him anyway. But I was watching. Documenting. Every conversation, every interaction, every strange look that passed between them. I started a folder on my laptop labeled Dad's Memories. Inside were all my photographs, all my evidence, all my observations. They thought I was grieving quietly. They had no idea I was building a case. Then I remembered something else. Someone else who'd been there during Dad's final days. Someone who might have seen something they'd missed. Carla, his hospice nurse. I called Carla 3 days after the memorial service. She'd been wonderful during Dad's care, patient and kind even during his worst moments. "Mallory," she said warmly when she answered. "How are you holding up?" "I need to talk to you about something," I said. "About Dad's final weeks." "Can we meet?" We arranged to meet at a coffee shop near the hospice facility. Carla arrived looking concerned, her nurse's instinct clearly sensing something wrong. I didn't waste time with small talk. "Do you remember Drew's brother visiting Dad?" I asked. She frowned, thinking. "Trent? He barely came at all. Except." She paused. "There was one night, maybe 3 weeks before your father passed. He and Drew showed up unannounced. Late, maybe 9 o'clock. My pulse quickened. What happened?" "They asked me to give them privacy," Carla said slowly. "Said they wanted to talk to him alone. I thought it was odd because your father was barely conscious by then, but families are strange sometimes. They locked the bedroom door." "Locked it?" She nodded. I waited outside. I could hear them talking, but not what they said. They were in there maybe 20 minutes. 20 minutes. Long enough to position papers, to guide a dying man's hand, to forge a signature. "Did you notice anything else?" I asked. Carla bit her lip. "Actually, yes. I kept something." Carla pulled out her phone, scrolling through old files. "I didn't trust them," she admitted. "Something felt wrong about the whole visit. Your father was too weak to really understand what was happening. So She turned the phone toward me. I recorded the audio from outside the door. My hands shook as I took her phone. She'd pressed record and left it running for nearly 30 minutes. I could hear muffled voices, rustling paper, movement. Then, clearer, Trent's voice, "Just hold his hands still. It doesn't have to be perfect. Nobody's going to examine it that closely." Drew's voice, quieter, "Are you sure about this?" "He's not going to remember anyway," Trent replied. "And Mallory's too soft to fight us on it. Just keep his hands steady." More rustling. Then Trent again, "There. Done. Let's get out of here." I looked up at Carla, my eyes burning with tears I refused to shed. "Can you send me this file?" She nodded immediately. "I've been debating whether to tell you. I didn't want to upset you during your grief, but what they did felt wrong. I'm glad you asked." The audio file arrived in my email 5 minutes later. I saved it in 3 different places. This was it. This was attempted fraud, caught on recording. Now I just needed to use it strategically. I took the audio file straight to my friend Zoe, who'd graduated law school 2 years ago and was now working at a firm downtown. She listened to the recording 3 times, her expression growing harder with each replay. "This is fraud," she said flatly. "Attempted fraud at minimum, successful fraud most likely. The will won't hold up in court if you can prove your father was incapacitated and they forged his signature." Relief flooded through me. "So we go to court immediately?" "Not yet," Zoe said, holding up a hand. "If you file now, they'll panic. They'll hide assets, move money, destroy evidence. What you need to do is let them get comfortable." She leaned forward, her eyes sharp. "How confident are they that they got away with it?" "Very," I admitted. "They think I'm too grief-stricken to fight." "Perfect. Let them think that a little longer. Let them start spending the money, making plans, getting cocky. The deeper they dig themselves in, the harder they fall." It went against every instinct I had. Waiting meant watching Trent enjoy what should have been mine. It meant pretending everything was fine. But Zoe was right. "How long?" I asked. "A few weeks. Maybe a month. Long enough for them to incriminate themselves further." I nodded slowly. "Okay. I'll wait. And I'll watch." Pretending everything was fine was the hardest thing I'd ever done. I accepted Diane's invitation to family dinner the following week. I sat at her dining table and smiled while Trent talked about his plans for Dad's estate. "I'm thinking of investing some of it," he said casually, cutting his steak. "Diversifying the portfolio. Your father would have wanted it managed properly." I bit my tongue and nodded. Drew watched me nervously throughout the meal. He kept asking if I was okay, if I needed anything. I wanted to scream at him that I needed him to be honest, to admit what he'd done, to choose me over his brother for once in our marriage. Instead, I said, "I'm fine. Just tired." After dinner, I helped Diane clear the table while the men went to the living room. She smiled at me, that same poisonous sweetness from the lawyer's office. "I'm glad you're being reasonable about this," she said. "Family harmony is so important." I smiled back, thinking about the audio recording on my phone. "Yes," I agreed. "Family is everything." That night, I lay awake next to Drew and listened to him breathe. He'd betrayed me. He'd helped his brother forge my father's signature and steal my inheritance. How long had he been planning this? How many nights had he lain here beside me, knowing what they were going to do? 2 weeks later, I pretended to go to bed early. Instead, I stayed in the hallway upstairs, my phone in my hand, listening to the conversation downstairs. Diane had come over for dinner. The 3 of them sat in the kitchen, their voices carrying up the stairs. "She's taking this better than I expected," Diane said. I could hear the clink of wine glasses. "Mallory's always been weak," Trent replied. "Too emotional to think clearly. She'll never prove anything." "Are you sure?" Drew's voice sounded uncertain. "What if she won't," Trent interrupted firmly. "She's too soft to fight us. Trust me. We're clear." I hit record on my phone, capturing every word. Diane laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "I told you she'd roll over." She always does what she's told. Besides, Trent continued, even if she tried to challenge it, what proof does she have? The will is legally filed. The lawyer accepted it. It's done. I still feel bad, Drew said quietly. Trent scoffed. You'll feel better when we're not drowning in debt. This inheritance saves us, Drew. Don't go soft now. My heart pounded as I stood there in the dark hallway, recording their confession. They'd just given me exactly what I needed. Proof of intent, proof of conspiracy, proof that they knew it was fraud. The next morning, I did more digging into Trent's finances. A few careful questions to mutual friends, some public record searches, and I found what I needed. Trent had used the estate as collateral for a massive loan. $200,000, borrowed against property he didn't technically own yet while the will was in probate. If the will was invalidated, all that debt would become his personal liability. No estate to back it up. Just Trent, drowning in a loan he couldn't repay. It was perfect. He'd gotten greedy, so confident in his fraud that he'd already started spending money he didn't have. I documented everything. The loan application was public record. The terms were clear. If the inheritance fell through, Trent would be financially ruined. I added this to my growing file of evidence. Forged signature. Audio confession. Witness testimony from Carla. Their own recorded conversation admitting to fraud. And now, proof that Trent had financially committed to a fraud he couldn't back out of. All I had to do now was wait for Zoe's signal. Wait for the perfect moment to strike. Patience had never been my strength, but I'd learned it over 6 months of hospice care. I could wait a little longer. Long enough to make sure they couldn't escape the consequences. Zoe filed the lawsuit on a Tuesday morning. No warning, no phone call, no chance for them to prepare. She submitted everything to the probate court, the handwriting analysis, Carla's testimony, the audio recording, photographs from Dad's journal. The court granted an immediate temporary freeze on all estate assets pending investigation. Every account, every property, every investment. Frozen. I wasn't there when Trent got the news, but I heard about it later. He'd been at a business lunch when his loan officer called. The estate collateral was frozen. His loan was immediately in default. $200,000 due immediately, or face legal action. Trent had reportedly gone white, excused himself from the table, and spent 20 minutes on the phone with his lawyer. By dinner time, I knew he'd know I was behind it. I'd been sitting in my living room, reading a book and drinking tea, when my phone rang. Drew's number. I didn't answer. He called 3 more times. Then Trent called. Then Diane. I ignored them all, my heart pounding but my face calm. Finally, around 8 o'clock, someone knocked on the door. I knew who it would be before I answered. Drew stood on my doorstep, his face pale and drawn. Behind him, the sun was setting. He looked older somehow, aged by panic. Drew pushed past me into the house without asking. You didn't have to do this, he said immediately, his voice shaking. We can work this out. You didn't have to go to court. I closed the door slowly and turned to face him. You didn't have to betray me, I replied calmly. Yet here we are. Mallory, please. It was Trent's idea. I just went along. You didn't think I'd fight back? I interrupted. You didn't think I'd notice my own father's signature was forged? Or did you just think I was too stupid to figure it out? His face crumbled. I'm sorry. I was desperate. We were drowning in debt, and Trent said this was the solution. He said your dad wouldn't have minded. My dad explicitly said everything should go to me, I said, my voice hard. I have it written in his journal. In his own handwriting. The real handwriting, not whatever you and Trent scribbled on that fake will. Drew tried to step closer. I moved back. We can fix this, he pleaded. I'll testify. I'll tell them it was Trent's idea. We can nothing, I said. I'm done, Drew. With all of this. With you. I walked to the door and opened it. Leave. Now. He stood there for a moment, looking lost. Then he walked out without another word. I closed and locked the door behind him. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. From relief. I'd finally said what needed to be said. An hour after Drew left, my phone rang again. This time it was a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. "You ungrateful little snake." Diane's voice was pure venom. "You've ruined this family. Everything we built, everything we worked for. All because you're too selfish to let things go." I held the phone away from my ear as she continued her rant. Accusations, insults, threats. She called me every name she could think of. Accused me of manipulating my dying father. Claimed I'd always been jealous of their family's success. "You've destroyed my boys," she finished. "I hope you're happy, you miserable." I hung up before she could finish. Then I opened my voicemail and listened to the message she'd left earlier. Same venom, same accusations, but this time recorded. I forwarded the entire voicemail to Zoe with a simple message: more evidence of their character. Might be useful in court. Zoe replied immediately, "Beautiful. This shows consciousness of guilt. People who are innocent don't react this way. Keep her talking if she calls again." But Diane didn't call again. Instead, the situation escalated in ways I hadn't anticipated. By the next morning, the story had leaked to the local news. The headline in the community newspaper read, "Local woman challenges allegedly forged will." The article didn't name names, but everyone in our small town knew exactly who it was about. The reporter had somehow gotten wind of the court filing, the fraud allegations, the frozen estate. My phone exploded with messages from people I hadn't heard from in years. Some were supportive. "Your father would be proud of you for fighting this." Others were judgmental. "Why are you tearing your family apart over money?" I ignored them all. But the public attention had consequences I hadn't predicted. Diane's social circle, the country club crowd she'd spent decades cultivating, turned on her fast. Accusations of fraud, of taking advantage of a dying man, were too scandalous to overlook. Friends stopped calling. Her regular lunch group uninvited her. Someone posted about it in a neighborhood Facebook group, and the comments were brutal. Trent's business partners started distancing themselves too. He ran a consulting firm, and reputation was everything. Clients began pulling contracts, citing concerns about ethical conduct. Within a week, his business was hemorrhaging money and clients. I felt no satisfaction in their social destruction. I'd only wanted what was rightfully mine. But I couldn't deny that watching their carefully constructed lives collapse felt like justice. The court date arrived on a cold morning in November. I dressed carefully in a navy suit, my father's favorite color. Zoe met me at the courthouse, carrying a briefcase full of evidence. "Ready?" she asked. I nodded, though my stomach was churning. Inside the courtroom, I saw them. Trent sat with his lawyer, his face hard and defensive. Drew was there too, though he wouldn't meet my eyes. Diane sat in the back row, her expression venomous. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s named Judge Patricia Hayes, reviewed the case files with careful attention. Carla testified first, describing the strange late-night visit and the recording she'd made. The audio played in the silent courtroom. "Just hold his hand still. It doesn't have to be perfect." Trent's voice, clear and damning. I watched his face go pale as his own words condemned him. The handwriting expert testified next, showing side-by-side comparisons of Dad's real signatures and the forged one. The differences were obvious when pointed out properly. In my professional opinion, the expert concluded, these signatures were made by different people. Trent's lawyer tried to argue, to suggest the signature might have just looked different because Dad was weak and dying. Judge Hayes shut that down quickly. "The audio recording contradicts that theory," she said coldly. Finally, it was my turn to testify. I walked to the witness stand on shaking legs and swore to tell the truth. Zoe led me through the basics first. My relationship with my father, my role as his caretaker, the 6 months I'd spent managing his care. Then she asked me to read from his hospice journal. I opened to the page I'd marked, the one where Dad had explicitly stated his wishes. My voice shook as I read, "Talked with Mallory today about the will. Told her everything goes to her. She's earned it. She's been here every day, every night. I couldn't have asked for a better daughter. She deserves everything I can give her. The courtroom was silent. I looked up and saw several people in the gallery wiping their eyes. He wrote that 4 weeks before he died, I continued, my voice stronger now. A week before Trent and Drew supposedly had him sign a new will. My father's mind was clear. His intentions were clear. And what they did. My voice broke. I took a breath. What they did was spit on his memory. They took advantage of a dying man because they thought no one would fight back. I looked directly at Trent. You were wrong. Judge Hayes nodded slowly. Thank you, Mrs. Whitmore. You may step down. We waited 3 days for Judge Hayes's decision. 3 days of anxious phone calls with Zoe, of avoiding social media, of trying to distract myself with anything else. When the call finally came, I was at home making coffee. Zoe's voice was triumphant. We won. The judge ruled the will completely invalid. Your father's original will is reinstated. Everything goes to you. I had to sit down. Relief flooded through me so intensely I felt dizzy. And Trent? He's being held personally liable for the debt he incurred using the estate as collateral. The judge was not kind in her ruling. She specifically mentioned that his actions showed premeditation and callous disregard for your father's actual wishes. There was more. The judge had referred the case to the district attorney for possible criminal charges. Forgery, fraud, conspiracy. Trent could face prison time. Drew, as an accessory, could face charges too. I thanked Zoe and hung up, then sat in my kitchen in stunned silence. I'd won. After months of grief and betrayal, after weeks of careful planning and patience, I'd actually won. My father's wishes would be honored. His estate would go where he'd intended it. But I wasn't done yet. There was one more thing I needed to do. One final break that would make my freedom complete. I filed for divorce the same day the will ruling came down. No warning, no discussion, no attempt at reconciliation. I'd already consulted with a different lawyer, had already prepared all the paperwork. Drew was served at Diane's house, where he'd apparently been staying since I kicked him out. The envelope contained not just divorce papers, but copies of all my evidence. The audio recording of their planning. The forged signature comparisons. The court ruling. Everything. I didn't include a note. What was there to say? He'd chosen his brother and his mother over his wife. He'd participated in fraud against my dying father. He'd betrayed every vow we'd made 12 years ago. No note could capture that. No words would make him understand what he'd destroyed. 3 days later, a moving truck came to the house. I'd already packed my things. Everything that mattered to me, my father's belongings, my personal items, my important documents. I left behind the furniture, the kitchen supplies, the wedding gifts we'd received. I didn't want anything that reminded me of this life. I'd found a small apartment across town, nothing fancy but clean and bright. As I loaded the last box into my car, Drew pulled into the driveway. He got out slowly, looking haggard. Mallory, wait. Please. Can we talk? No, I said simply. There's nothing left to talk about. I never meant to hurt you. I finally looked at him directly. Yes, you did. You meant every bit of it. You just didn't think there would be consequences. I got in my car and drove away without looking back. I sold my father's house 3 weeks later. It was too big for me alone, and I didn't want to live in the place where I'd watched him die. The sale was quick. I used the money to buy a modest house in a quiet neighborhood, something manageable and mine. With the rest of the inheritance, I did something Dad would have loved. I established a scholarship fund in his name for students pursuing nursing degrees. Dad had always praised the nurses who cared for him, especially Carla. These people are angels, he'd said more than once. The scholarship fund would help train more angels, more Carlas who would care for dying people with kindness and dignity. I also donated to the hospice facility that had supported us through those final months. They named a room after my father. His photograph hung on the wall, smiling in a picture from before he got sick. Starting over felt strange. I bought new furniture piece by piece, decorating my new house in colors and styles I'd always loved but never chosen before. I'd always deferred to Drew's preferences, to his family's expectations. Now I chose what I wanted. Quiet dignity felt better than loud victory. I wasn't interested in gloating or revenge tours. I just wanted peace. But apparently, Diane wasn't done trying to control the narrative. 2 months after the court ruling, an envelope arrived at my new house. Diane's handwriting on the front, my new address somehow obtained despite my efforts at privacy. I held it for a long moment, debating whether to open it. Finally, curiosity won. Inside was a single page of expensive stationery. Her perfect cursive filled the page. Mallory, I'm writing to remind you that family forgives. What happened was unfortunate, but we are still family. Drew misses you. The holidays are coming, and it would mean so much if you would join us. Despite everything, we must remember that forgiveness is divine. Blood is thicker than water. We can move past this if you're willing to be reasonable. I read it twice, my anger building with each word. Forgiveness? She wanted me to forgive them for attempting to steal my inheritance, for forging my dying father's signature, for months of betrayal and lies? I walked to the fireplace I'd been using on cold evenings. I tossed Diane's letter into the flames and watched the expensive paper curl and blacken. The words disappeared into ash. That felt like closure. I didn't need to respond. I didn't need to explain or justify myself. The letter burning was answer enough. But the ripple effects of the court case were still spreading, hitting harder than even I had expected. I heard about Drew's financial collapse through mutual friends who still talked to both of us. Apparently, Drew had been hiding significant debts from me throughout our marriage. Credit cards I didn't know about, a failed investment in a friend's business, gambling losses he'd never mentioned. He'd been counting on access to my inheritance to dig himself out. Without it, and without my income or credit supporting him, everything fell apart. His car was repossessed. He maxed out his remaining credit cards trying to stay afloat. He moved back in with Diane permanently, unable to afford rent anywhere else. Trent, dealing with his own crisis, cut his brother off completely. I'm not going down for your mistakes, he'd reportedly told Drew. You got yourself into this mess. Diane refused to help financially too. Her own resources were stretched thin dealing with Trent's legal problems and the social fallout from the scandal. Drew had gambled on my inheritance saving him, and he'd lost everything. I felt a strange mix of emotions hearing about his downfall. Not satisfaction, exactly. Just a quiet sense that justice had its own way of working things out. He'd made his choices. Now he was living with them. Trent's fall was even more spectacular. His consulting business filed for bankruptcy 6 months after the court ruling. The forged will was public record now, easily searchable online. Every potential client who Googled his name found articles about the fraud case. His existing clients pulled out. New business dried up completely. His business partners dissolved their arrangement, not wanting to be associated with someone under investigation for forgery and fraud. The criminal charges moved forward slowly but steadily. The district attorney built a case using all the evidence I'd provided. The audio recording, the handwriting analysis, Carla's testimony. Trent faced up to 5 years in prison if convicted. His lawyer was negotiating a plea deal, but the terms weren't favorable. Meanwhile, the loan he'd taken against the estate came due. $200,000 with no way to pay it back. The bank seized his personal assets, his car, his investment accounts, even his house. Diane had to sell her own house to help cover some of his debts, moving into a small apartment across town. She blamed me publicly, telling anyone who would listen that I'd destroyed her family. But fewer and fewer people were listening. The evidence was too clear, the betrayal too obvious. Their reputation was ruined permanently. A year after my father's death, I stood at the opening event for the nonprofit I'd built in his name. The Caretaker Support Foundation provided resources, counseling, and financial assistance to families dealing with hospice care. My father's photograph hung above the entrance, larger than life. His real signature was engraved on a brass plaque below it, his distinctive slanted writing captured perfectly. No Diane. No Drew. No Trent. Just people who genuinely cared about my father, and people who would benefit from his legacy. Carla was there, smiling proudly. Zoe attended with her family. Former neighbors who'd brought meals during Dad's illness. The hospice nurses who'd made his final months bearable. I gave a short speech about turning pain into purpose, about honoring memory through action rather than words. They tried to steal what was mine, I said, looking at the people gathered. My father's wishes, his legacy, his final gift to me. But I didn't just take it back. I turned it into something they can never touch. Something that will help families for generations. As I cut the ribbon on the foundation's doors, I felt my father's presence. Not in a supernatural way, but in the knowledge that I'd done right by him. His memory wasn't tarnished by greed and forgery. It was honored through compassion and purpose. That was the revenge karma delivered. Not destruction, but transformation. Not bitterness, but something better.